Hi, this is Pei Zhang. This is the final presentation for this course, and we're going to talk about how we understand texts and what we should pay attention to before we start drafting. This may sound very obvious, but it is worth remembering in the context of medical translation. If we don't understand the source text, we cannot translate it. As translators, one of our basic tasks is to understand so that we can enable our readers to understand the same. Whatever we fail to understand in the source text is likely to be either misinterpreted or not understood at all by the reader of the target text. Although this is not the right occasion to review it, it is worth mentioning that there is a wealth of scientific literature on the cognitive mechanisms involved in text comprehension. We'll tap into the mind of Kinch, Jackendorf, Wilson, and Brown, from which the following conclusions can be drawn. The text is like an iceberg. On the surface, we only see part of it, which means that we often need to infer the underlying intended meaning. We use information from the text itself, from the context, and from the previous knowledge that we have about the topic of the text, in order to infer the intended meaning. In the process of understanding a text, we construct a mental representation of it from the words on the page, but also from personal perceptions of reality, ideas, images, and even emotions. These elements may come from a variety of sources: perceptual systems, memories, knowledge, beliefs, body states, or goals when reading. Comprehension occurs when the cognitive elements that enter into the process are meaningfully related to one another. The cognitive elements that do not fit the pattern of the majority are suppressed from the mental representation. A reader has specific goals for understanding a text. In our case, translating it into a different language so that the target reader can understand it too. A comprehender has a given background of knowledge and experience of the topic of the text. In the case of medical translators without a medical degree, this background knowledge has to be acquired gradually through other means. A comprehender is in a given perceptual situation, in our case, receiving information input only from the printed words on a page of text. From these words, the reader constructs basic idea units in the form of propositions. Given these idea units in the form of propositions as well as the reader's goals, associated elements from his or her long-term memory, such as knowledge or experiences, are retrieved to form an interrelated network with the already existing perceptual elements. Without the reader's long-term memory, it is impossible to form the interrelated network and the mental representation of the text. Hence the importance of acquiring background medical knowledge. The linguistic form of a sentence or expression can lead to more than one interpretation. Surrounding text and context are required to choose the appropriate interpretation and reject other interpretations which may be linguistically defensible. The closer the new information is connected with the surrounding text and context, the more relevant the interpretation. In the process of understanding a text, we constantly make predictions or hypotheses that we either reinforce or reject in accordance with the information provided by the text. Source text authors are not omniscient and therefore are not always able to provide the reader with the optimum linguistic elements that would convey the intended meaning clearly and economically. Medical translators may have to supply these for the readers. In the case of genre shifts, target readers may not have the same previous knowledge about the topic of the text as the source readers and may need extra information. So, what is your comprehension style? It is very important to establish general categories of comprehension styles according to their use of predictions and self-monitoring. You should be aware of them and decide which fits your comprehension style better. There may be more than one that reflects your behavior as a comprehender, depending on the complexity of the text you're dealing with and the degree of familiarity you have with its content. Good comprehenders interact with the text, constructing meanings and monitoring their own understanding. Non-risk takers rely heavily on the text and fail to go beyond the words on the page to make predictions, draw inferences, or make connections. Non-integrators draw on clues from the text and also from past experiences, but don't integrate them. Schema imposers make an initial prediction or hypothesis and then try to make the meaning of the text fit that first impression. Storytellers are extremely dependent on prior knowledge and experiences. Rather than answering questions related to the information in the text, storytellers relate the question to their own experiences. Your aim as a medical translator should be the first one in the list above, good comprehenders, for which a series of habits that efficient readers generally employ to construct meaning are needed. They read the text until they find out enough to formulate a hypothesis. In other words, don't reach for the dictionary the first time you see a term you don't understand. They evaluate the information they're reading and decide whether or not it fits their original hypothesis. Thus, formulating hypotheses and evaluating them enables you to find the relevance of what you're reading. They begin to make predictions about what will come next in the text and begin to make a series of predictions that are subsequently confirmed or modified according to the information they're reading. Don't worry if your predictions are not right. What really matters is that you make them and use them. If their predictions are not confirmed, good readers self-monitor and use strategies to determine whether or not their past experiences, predictions, and overall understanding of the readings are making sense. The more unfamiliar you are with the topic of the text, the more you should check that whatever you read does make sense. So, before you start to write, here are some general principles that you should follow. In the process of drafting the target text, we have to make many decisions. The following principles are intended as a guide. No matter what the specifics of the assignments are, the target text should be coherent with the source text as far as factual information is concerned. Coherent internally so that the information hangs together in a logical order. Truthful and accurate, corresponding with fact or reality. Readable, so that the reader can process the information without undue effort. Clear, as easy to understand as possible. Grammatically and syntactically correct. Adequate, stylistically and rhetorically, in keeping with the communicative situation and context. Now it comes to styles of drafting. Are you a hare or a tortoise? Before beginning to draft the target text, we have to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages of starting to write before dealing with some or all of the comprehension gaps. Our deliberations will be influenced by three factors: our perception of the degree of difficulty of the source text, our degree of familiarity with the topic and terminology, and the complexity of the assignment in terms of formal and communicative differences between the source and the target texts. So if you start to write the draft before fully understanding the source text, the advantage is that although our draft will probably have many gaps, at least we have something from which to start researching and improving. The disadvantage is that without understanding the key concepts, it is impossible to follow the narrations, descriptions, and arguments of the source text and connect them into a relevant whole. Therefore, it becomes difficult to link microelements and make inferences. We may also feel insecure when writing the target text, and may tend to produce literal translations when lost. But if you start to write the draft after you fully understand the source text, then you will probably feel more secure and empowered to write a target text which makes sense to our reader. We will also be able to write with fewer interruptions. The disadvantage is that the information acquired and the solutions found to specific problems during documentary research need to be retained in note form or in the memory. This takes time and effort. Of course, there's not only one method of drafting, and like other writers, translators have their own individual preferences. Nevertheless, writers seem to fall into two main types as far as writing the target text is concerned: hares and tortoises. Hares are impatient. They want to be off in this race against time. They don't want to stop to think carefully. Getting to the end is all important, so they write down everything they can as quickly as possible. But their initial drafts are pretty dreadful. All the same, they're reassured because they feel they've made a start. Tortoises take their time and get there in the end. They approach things carefully, and they spend a great deal of time thinking about what they're writing, which means that they aim at something approaching a finished text. They revise constantly as they go along. They make slow progress, but the first draft is robust and largely error-free. These two extreme cases are rather unrealistic stereotypes, and few writers are exclusively one or the other. Another factor in the choice of approach may be experience, or the lack of it. Experienced translators may prefer to write a fairly polished first draft, which needs minor editing and revision, whereas inexperienced translators may feel more comfortable and confident working step by step through a number of drafts. So, what is your writing style? In your next translation assignment, try to become aware of your working style using the information in the subsection. Then decide in which ways your working style could be rebalanced between the two extremes described above in order to improve your performance as a medical translator. What do successful writers do in the biomedical fields? Medical translation is, of course, a type of medical writing. According to the literature on medical writing, professionals do not write at random, but use techniques such as listing topics dealt with in the text, drawing concept maps, drawing issue trees, outlining, drafting following standard structure, starting the place that makes sense for them, minimizing distractions any way they can, keeping the text simple. When really pressed, spending more time on the first draft, not less. Writing around missing information. Recognizing the signs of becoming bogged down. Dealing constructively with writer's block. Medical translators can definitely benefit from these and other techniques used by medical writers. As we can see from the list above, professional writers don't necessarily start at the beginning and plot through to the end, but they work methodically nevertheless. Without a methodology for drafting the target text, translators, particularly inexperienced ones, may be less aware of what they're doing and run the risk of focusing too much on the microelements, both of which may result in literal and useless renderings of the source text. Hence the importance of developing a methodology in which the source text is viewed just as factual information, and the target text is produced with intended meaning and function regarded as of paramount importance.